YUGI-Tips. Alright, so the two cards I want to talk about is Peking Goblin and Exchange. The playability of these cards. I like to look at certain cards, look at their effects. Sometimes I revisit certain old cards, and especially when I'm looking through my my collection of bulk commons or just bulk cards in general, whether they're common or not, doesn't really matter. They're Yu-Gi-Oh cards regardless of the rarity, right? And look through the cards, reread some of their effects, and see if there's any value in these cards. See if there's any current value in some of these cards. For example, Peking Goblin. Peking Goblin came out in Generations Force, so it wasn't that long ago, but pretty long ago. And Exchange is very, very old. Came out a long time ago. Don't remember when it came out. I think the original version, because it has been reprinted, but the original version, I think it came from some old Yu-Gi-Oh game, just like how you used to get Harpy's Feather Duster from a video game. Anyway, Peking Goblin's effect is look at the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck, choose one of those cards, and put it on the bottom of your opponent's deck. Then rearrange the other 2 in any order you want on top of your opponent's deck. Automatically, some people will be like, it doesn't seem that great of an effect because it's essentially an egg one, right? You play it, you do something, and then that's it. It doesn't give you a card like Pot of Greed or anything like that. It doesn't give you pluses. It doesn't increase your board state. It doesn't thin out your deck. So because of that, a lot of people will immediately look at it as like, not an effect that I want. I want something cool like Dark Hole or Geki or Mirror Force or Harpy's Feather Dust or something cool, something that can deal with the board or my opponent's board or deal with my any cards in my opponent's hand. The thing is that your opponent's going to, if your opponent goes first, more likely they're going to use up their whole hand anyway to set up a board. Right? So trying to use card effects that deal with your opponent's hands, if they go first, is not useful. Unlike in Magic is very useful to use card effects that take cards from your opponent's hands, like Thoughtseize and Ravenous Rats. Make your opponent discard cards, so that way they don't have cards to play when they can afford to tap the mana to play, right? In Magic. But in Yu-Gi-Oh, your opponent can essentially play their whole hand. They have a lot of traps, they can set all the traps, right? They have a lot of spells and traps, they can set those. If they have, one monster and spells and traps, they can set the spells and traps, then summon the monster or set the monster, right? So it's much easier for your opponent to dump the whole hand onto the field in Yu-Gi-Oh than it would be Magic, unless you're playing Affinity Magic, right? Anyway, so why would Peking Goblin be a good card? Well, one, your opponent's going to mostly use their hands to put stuff on the board, right? So you don't have to worry about negging their hand, right? You don't have to worry about dealing with what's in their hands, since they already used up their hands by putting everything on the field. So if how many of the cards is not monsters, by them putting cards in their spell and trap zone, and which ones are monsters by them putting monsters in the monster zone, clearly, right? So you clearly know, at least enough of that information. Let's say your opponent had went first, 5 cards, right? They set 4 cards and summon a monster, ended their turn, right? Well, automatically, they got 4 non-monster cards face down in the spell and trap zone, unless they're artifact monsters, right? And then they have a monster. So you already have that much knowledge, so you can, pretty much figure out what their face down might be. There might be bluffs. There might just be a whole bunch of spells that don't do anything on your turn, and you can just take advantage of that, right? And try to go for an OTK. But the thing is, you don't know what the next cards are going to be, so they could top deck a really good card and whatnot. So this is very useful for scenarios where your opponent is top decking. Let's say you have a nice board, you summon a whole bunch of monsters, attack, deal a lot of damage, and then your opponent's still alive. To prevent them from top decking that dark hole, right, that Regeki, you can play Peking Goblin in your main phase 2, look at the top 3 cards of the deck, and manipulate the deck, right? Let's say off the top of the 3, from the top of the 3 cards of the deck that you saw, one of them is that dark hole I was talking about. Throw it on the bottom of the deck. Then the next 2 cards you can put it anywhere you want. You could put a trap and then a monster. Let's say the other card is a monster and a trap. You want to put the trap on top of the monster second, because when they draw, it's a trap. What do they do with traps? They set it. So you're slowing them down by doing it. Then next turn, they'll draw a monster. Then they can try and make a move. So you essentially buy yourself an extra 1 or 2 turns by doing so. And then after that, then they can start drawing their cards regular, right? So you gain extra turns by doing it. Now let's say you go first, and you have Peking Goblin, you have some cards, you set up your board, you play Peking Goblin. You look at the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck, you might notice there's a very powerful card in that stack. Let's say Solemn Strike or something. You'd be like, alright, I'm going to take that Solemn Strike, put it on the bottom of the deck. So it'll be harder for them to get to it, because it's all the way at the bottom. And then, the next 2 cards, put it in the order I want. Like I said, if it's one of them is a trap, one of them is a monster or a spell, you want to put the trap on top and the monster or spell on second, on the bottom right, when you rearrange those 2 cards on top of your opponent's deck, because they have to set a trap in order to use it in the first place. So you slow them down, which is the whole point, is to slow them down. Now let's say you do that, right? You put the trap and whatnot, you set your back row, and one of your back row cards is Wing Blast. Alright, so now it's your opponent's turn, he draws, he gets that trap, he sets that trap, plays some cards and whatnot, and then during the end phase, you Wing Blast one of his cards in his spawn trap zone and put it on top of his deck. You're slowing him down even more, right? Because now, whatever that is, he has to draw it, set it again, and then the turn after that, he draws whatever the other card was, whether it was a spell or a monster, and then after that, he gets to, draw other cards and whatnot and play. So you're slowing them down, and slowing down your opponent is just as good as, breaking boards and whatnot, right? Because you don't want your opponent to draw their outs. This is a way you can almost guarantee they're not going to draw their outs. Now, Peking Goblin was a quick play. Oh my god, this would be bananas, right? Because you can even chain it to search cards, or you can chain it to mainly draw cards. That's what I really meant. Draw cards. Search cards. They can search out whatever they want, shuffle them, so be irrelevant. But if they play the pod duality, if this was a quick play, you can chain it and reduce their consistency. Make sure they can't add one of those good cards from the deck to their hands. Throw it on the bottom of the deck, and then put the last 2 cards on top of the deck. Doesn't matter the order, because they're going to grab those 2 cards plus the next card, which will be 3 cards. They have to choose for one of those cards, because of pod duality's effect, add it to their hand. They can't special that turn, so that's good for you, and, whatever. But at least you reduce the chances of them getting a good card, because you made sure you got rid of the good card before they got to it. Right? So it's something like that, if it was a quick play. But it's not. So you have to kind of preemptively, you got to play before they do anything. But again, like I said, the ability to manipulate your opponent's next draw. Like, you play the card and then your opponent draws whatever you want him to draw. Think about that. You're making your opponent draw what you want him to draw. And it's for the next 2 turns. I shouldn't really have to explain too much about why Peking Goblin is a good card. Moving on to the next card, Exchange. What's good about Exchange is it gives you hand knowledge, right? It lets you know, especially if you go first, lets you know what's in your opponent's hand, right? You set up your board, you play Exchange, you keep one card in your hand, one card you don't mind giving to your opponent because you don't care. You give it to your opponent, and then you get to see your opponent's hand, so now you know what your opponent's playing with. So you can play around your opponent's hand, you memorize what cards in his hands. And of course, because the way Exchange works, you can take one of those key cards. He might have a really, really good card that you don't want him to have. Let's say he has a Twin Twister in his hand, and you just set your back row. You don't want him to blow up your back row, right? So take the Twin Twister. Bang. You preemptively stop them from, breaking your board or doing something. You know how they always, some people would say, oh yeah, you have that unbreakable board with those powerful monsters. Tribute all three of them and give you, you know, a Winged Dragon or Raw Spear mode, right? Or hey, I'm gonna give you a Kaiju to get rid of your boss monster that's preventing me from playing Yu-Gi-Oh. Well, with exchange, you can take your opponent's Kaiju, right? Now he doesn't have it. Now he won't be able to take your take away your to take away your boss monster. They won't be able to break your board so easily, right? Another thing you can do, right, is that you can add on top of that Peking Goblin, manipulate the next 3 cards on top of the deck, and there you go. Now you have full control of the game because you made sure that they don't have, they're not going to get a good draw next turn when it's their turn, and you took away something really good from the hand. So if you play these 2 spell cards in the same turn, you're going to gain a lot of advantage from that. And who doesn't want a lot of advantage? Who doesn't want that type of advantage, right? Especially when you're playing competitive at a tournament, it's all about advantage. And that's the end of the video.